Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The static crackles through speakers that haven't been cleaned in months, carrying with it the voice of a man who sounds like he's aged 20 years in 20 seconds. If you're seeing this, don't send anyone else. For the love of God, don't come back here. Dr. Elliot Graves' face fills the screen, frost creeping across his helmet cam like fingers reaching for his eyes. Then nothing. Just the empty howl of Martian wind and the cold hum of dead air. This footage was recovered from Ari's station on March 3rd, 2042. It was the last transmission received before the facility went dark. Of the 12 scientists stationed there, only one returned to Earth alive. His name was Elliot Graves, and for 2 years he refused to speak about what happened during that first winter on Mars. This is his story, or at least the story he was finally willing to tell. But perhaps we should start at the beginning, before the winter, before the ice, before the things that should not be. Dr. Elliot Graves was 41 years old when he left Earth, a geological engineer from Auckland, New Zealand, with a reputation for solving problems other people didn't know existed. He'd spent 6 years designing the thermal architecture for Ari's station, humanity's first permanent settlement on Mars. The station was built into the northern rim of Valles Marineris, the largest canyon in the solar system, a scar across the red planet's face that made the Grand Canyon look like a scratch. Elliot didn't just want to study Mars, his ex-wife Margaret tells us from her home in Wellington. She's holding a coffee cup with both hands, like she needs the warmth. He wanted to prove that Earth wasn't special, that life was inevitable, given the right conditions. He used to say that God played dice with the universe, and Mars was just waiting for the right role. She pauses, looking out a window at the grey Pacific Ocean. I think he found out that something else was playing too. The crew of 12 launched from Earth in April 2041. Commander Petra Volkov, a former Russian cosmonaut with ice blue eyes and a handshake that could crack walnuts. Dr. Idris Osman, microbiologist, and Graves' closest friend since university, a man who laughed at his own jokes and cried at sunsets. Felix Strand, navigation specialist, with a photographic memory and a collection of paperback mysteries. Dr. Hannah Locke, the mission physician, who'd sewn up knife wounds in Syrian field hospitals before joining the space program. 8 others whose names would later be sealed in classified files. Their families paid settlements, their stories reduced to footnotes. By November 2041, they'd been on Mars for 6 months. The novelty had worn thin, replaced by the grinding routine of survival. Check the seals, monitor the atmosphere, ration the coffee, watch the dust storms roll across the horizon like waves on a toxic ocean. The first Martian winter was coming. Temperatures would drop to minus 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The carbon dioxide atmosphere would partially freeze, falling as dry ice snow. The thin Martian air would become even thinner. For 4 months they would be trapped inside Ari's station, waiting for spring in a place where spring was just a marginally less hostile version of hell. But they had work to do first. Graves led a team to excavate a geothermal storage network beneath the station. The plan was to drill down 50 feet, install thermal batteries, and create a heat reserve that would keep them alive through the worst of winter. Simple engineering, standard procedure. On December 1st, 2041, at approximately 10:45 in the morning, local Mars time, The drill bit punched through something it shouldn't have. The resistance just vanished, Graves recorded in his journal that night. His handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. 1 second we were grinding through basalt, the next we were spinning in empty space. Ground-penetrating sonar showed a cavity beneath us, massive, roughly 130 feet across. The crew gathered in the operations center that evening, watching the sonar imagery flicker across screens. The void beneath them glowed on the monitors like a secret waiting to be told. "Could be a lava tube," offered Nina Castellanos, the station engineer. She was from Barcelona, spoke 4 languages, and had a habit of clicking her pen when she was nervous. Click, click, click. "Wrong depth for volcanic activity in this region," Graves replied. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, studying the image like it was a puzzle box. And look at the shape. Too regular. Too smooth. Commander Volkov crossed her arms. She had a way of filling a room despite being barely 5'6". Recommendation? Graves didn't hesitate. "We go down. We might not get another chance. Winter's coming. And after that we're here for another 18 months, before the next crew arrives. If there's something down there, we need to know now." Osman looked at his friend with something like concern. "And if there's nothing down there?" Graves smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then we've got a great story for the folks back home." Volkov authorized the descent. Graves, Osman, and Strand would make the initial entry. Standard exploration protocol. 3 people, full biocontainment suits, safety lines, 2-hour maximum. Go down, look around, come back. Simple. They descended on December 4th at 3:17 in the afternoon. The helmet cam footage still exists, buried in a classified server, somewhere beneath Virginia soil, but Graves described it in enough detail that we can reconstruct what they saw. The rappel took 11 minutes. Their headlamps carved cones of light through absolute darkness, illuminating red dust that hung in the thin air like frozen smoke. The temperature gauge on Graves' suit read -93 degrees Fahrenheit. When his boots touched the chamber floor, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that swallowed sound, that ate it and gave nothing back. "This isn't natural," he whispered into his comm. His voice sounded flat, dead. The cavern stretched in all directions, walls rising up into shadow. But it was the walls themselves that made Graves' breath catch in his throat. They were smooth. Not naturally smooth, not weathered by wind, or water over millions of years. Carved smooth, deliberately. The surface had an almost mirror-like quality, catching and reflecting their lights in ways that made the space seem infinite, like they were standing in a hall of frozen mirrors. And the ice? The walls were glazed with ancient ice, thick as a man's arm, in places thin as paper in others. Under their work lights it glowed, faintly, barely perceptibly, but it glowed. "Bioluminescent bacteria?" Osman suggested, his scientific mind already working the problem. "At -93 degrees? I don't think so." Graves moved closer to the wall, reaching out. "Wait, there's something in the ice." They moved as one, 3 cones of light converging on a single point. Strand got there first, and the sound he made was not quite a word, not quite a scream. Something in between. Shapes in the ice. Dozens of them. Tall and thin and unmistakably humanoid, but wrong in ways that made your hindbrain scream even before your conscious mind understood why. Graves approached slowly, like you'd approach a sleeping animal you weren't sure was actually sleeping. His light played across the nearest figure, and details emerged from the frozen depths like a photograph, developing in reverse. Too tall. Maybe 7 feet. Maybe more. Limbs slightly too long in proportion to the torso. Hands with 6 fingers, each finger articulated with 1 too many joints. The head was elongated, the skull rising to a point that was almost elegant. The face was preserved in an expression that Graves would later describe as resignation, the mouth slightly open, the eyes behind lids of ice sunken but large, too large. "They're not wearing environment suits," Strand said. His voice had gone very quiet, very calm, the way voices get when the mind is protecting itself from what it's seeing. "How long have they been here?" Graves played his light along the wall, counting shapes. 10, 15, 20, more disappearing into the darkness at the edge of their lights. "Based on the ice formation?" His voice was steady, clinical, the voice of a scientist observing a specimen. Thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. Osman had moved to another section of wall. "Elliot, there are more over here, many more." They spent the next hour in silence, moving along the walls, counting. When they finished the circuit, Graves's count was 89 bodies, arranged in 3 concentric circles around the chamber's center. "Mission Control is going to lose their minds," Strand whispered. "Mission Control," Graves replied, "is 22 minutes away by radio. We're on our own." He was right, of course, but he was also wrong. They weren't alone. They'd never been alone. The crew meeting that night lasted 4 hours. Dr. Locke, the physician, stood at the front of the room with her arms crossed, her dark eyes moving from face to face. "Until we know what killed them, no one enters that chamber without full biocontainment. No exceptions." Someone asked, "What if they died of old age?" Locke shook her head. "At the exact same moment? All 89 of them? No. Something killed them, and we need to assume it could kill us too." Commander Volkov pulled up the photos Graves had taken, projecting them onto the wall screen. The frozen faces stared out at the living, their expressions somehow accusatory. "I've sent everything to Earth," Volkov said, "but we won't hear back for at least 2 days, and even then, the bureaucrats are going to need time to figure out how to handle this. In the meantime, we proceed carefully. Graves, you'll lead on this. Put together a research protocol. I want to know what they are, where they came from, and what killed them. In that order." Graves nodded. He was already thinking about the chamber, about the smooth walls and the glowing ice and the bodies arranged in their perfect circles. There was a design here, an intention, and intention meant intelligence, and intelligence meant questions that humanity wasn't ready to answer. Dr. Raymond Kemp was 63 years old and had spent 40 of those years studying the possibility of extraterrestrial life. When the photos from Mars reached his desk at NASA's Astrobiology Division, he didn't sleep for 3 days. "The bone structure was all wrong," he tells us now, speaking carefully, choosing each word like he's defusing a bomb. "Humanoid, yes, but the skull capacity was 30% larger than human. The skeletal density was half what it should be for beings that tall. They didn't evolve on Earth. They didn't evolve on Mars. They evolved somewhere with lower gravity, thinner atmosphere, probably orbiting a different type of star." He pauses, looking at something off camera. "The question isn't what they were. The question is why they came to Mars to die." Graves spent December 5th and 6th establishing the research protocol. Osman would handle biological samples. Locke would manage medical analysis and safety. Strand would document and catalogue. Castellanos would monitor environmental conditions in the chamber. And Graves himself would study the architecture, the purpose, the why of it all. The chamber became his obsession. He descended alone on December 7th, against Volkov's standing orders about the buddy system. His journal entry from that day is telling. The walls aren't just smooth, they're carved with symbols. Thousands of them, hidden under the ice, only visible when you shine your light at the right angle. They repeat in groups of 7, always 7. I don't know what they mean, but they mean something. Language, religion, history. I spent 6 hours today mapping the eastern wall. The symbols change as you move towards the center of the chamber. They start complex and become simpler, like you're moving backward through the evolution of written language. Or forward. I can't tell which. Osman called me 3 times on the comm. I ignored him. He'll understand eventually. This is bigger than protocol. This is bigger than any of us. The body count was refined over the next 2 days. 89 exactly, arranged in 3 circles. The outer circle contained 48 bodies. The middle circle held 32. The inner circle, closest to the center, had only 9. Like ranks, Strand suggested during a team meeting, or social hierarchy, the important ones near the center. Locke countered, or the condemned ones. In human cultures, we either elevate the powerful or isolate the cursed. Without more context, we can't know which. Graves wasn't listening. He was staring at a photograph of the chamber floor, recently cleaned of ice dust. At the very center of the space, carved into the stone, was a spiral. 12 feet across, the line etched deep and precise, winding from the outer edge to a depression at the center. The depression was perfectly smooth and exactly the size of a human hand. Strand had warned when they found it, "Don't touch anything, we don't know what killed them." But Graves was already thinking about touching it, already wondering what would happen if he did. The dream started on December 10th. Graves woke at 3 o'clock in the morning, his sheets soaked with sweat despite the cold. He'd been walking through corridors that weren't on Mars, weren't anywhere he'd ever been. The walls were red, but not Martian red. Deeper, wetter, like the inside of something living. There were voices speaking in a language he'd never heard, but somehow he understood. They were saying goodbye. Over and over, in 1,000 different ways, they were saying goodbye. He went to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, and caught sight of himself in the mirror. For just a moment, less than a second, his eyes looked different. Larger, darker, wrong. He blinked, and they were normal again. At breakfast, Nina Castellanos sat down across from him with her tray. She looked like she hadn't slept. "You have the dreams too?" she asked quietly. Graves set down his coffee. "What dreams?" She leaned forward. "Red corridors, voices in a language you shouldn't understand. The feeling that you're remembering something instead of dreaming it. Hugh had them too. He told me this morning. Hugh Deering ran environmental systems, a quiet man from Edinburgh who spoke in a soft burr and kept to himself. Graves found him in the operations centre running diagnostics on the air filtration. "The dreams," Graves said without preamble. "Tell me about them." Deering didn't look up from his screens. "Same as yours, I'd wager. Walking through places I've never been. Understanding words I've never learned. Waking up feeling like I've lost something important but not knowing what it was." His voice was matter of fact, resigned. "When did they start?" Graves pressed. "The night after you opened the chamber." Graves felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You think they're connected?" Deering finally looked at him, and his eyes were tired, haunted. "Don't you? 3 of us have the exact same dreams the exact same night we found those things. That's not coincidence, Dr. Graves. That's cause and effect." Dr. Locke ran medical workups on all 3 of them. Brain activity, normal. Blood chemistry, normal. No toxins, no pathogens, no radiation exposure beyond expected background levels. Physically, they were fine. Shared dreams are psychologically impossible, Locke told them in her office. Behind her, through the window, the Martian landscape stretched out like a frozen ocean of rust. Unless we're talking about suggestion or shared trauma. 3 people in a stressful environment might independently generate similar anxiety dreams. Graves leaned forward. with the same architectural details, the same unknown language. Locke didn't have an answer for that. Dr. Yolanda Martinez, a sleep psychologist back on Earth, reviewed the data via the communication delay. Her response came back 2 days later, her voice crackling through speakers. Identical dream content across multiple subjects with no prior discussion suggests either a shared external stimulus we're not detecting or a level of unconscious communication we don't yet understand. Neither explanation is satisfying. My recommendation: remove the affected individuals from proximity to the chamber and monitor for changes. If the dreams persist, we're looking at something outside current psychological models. If they stop, we at least know the trigger. Graves listened to the message 3 times. Then he ignored it completely. He started sleeping in the chamber. He'd descend in the evening after Volkov thought he was in his quarters and set up a sleeping bag near the spiral at the chamber's center. The cold was extraordinary, even through his environment suit, but he didn't care. The dreams were stronger here, clearer, and he was starting to understand them. If something's trying to communicate, he told himself, I need to listen. But Osman knew what he was doing. Osman always knew. He confronted Graves on December 11th, in the storage room where they kept the sample containers. His voice was low and urgent. You're not listening, Elliot. You're being called. Graves was cataloguing ice samples, his hands steady even though his mind was anywhere but here. There's a difference? Osman grabbed his arm, forcing him to look up. Yes, listening implies choice. Being called implies compulsion. And I've known you for 20 years, and I've never seen you compelled by anything. Until now. Graves pulled his arm free. They were trying to tell us something. Before they died, they were trying to leave a message. Don't you want to know what it was? Osman's voice softened. Not if it costs your sanity. Or your life. Margaret asked me to look after you. I'm trying to keep that promise. Graves returned to his samples. Margaret's on Earth. And so are all the people who think they know what's best for us. We're the ones here, Idris. We're the ones who get to decide what risks are worth taking. Osman stood there for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was sad. That's not you talking. Not all of it, anyway. But Graves didn't respond. He was already thinking about the chamber, about descending again, about pressing his hand into that smooth depression at the center of the spiral and seeing what would happen. The thing about obsession is that it blinds you to everything else, including the signs that reality itself is breaking down. On December 12th at 9:33 in the morning, Castellanos detected a power anomaly. There was a drain on the station's energy systems that shouldn't exist. A trickle of electricity flowing toward the chamber through conduits that weren't connected to anything. She traced the power lines 3 times, checking and rechecking. The readings didn't make sense. It was like the chamber itself was drawing power, pulling energy from the station like a parasite feeding on a host. But there was nothing down there. No equipment, no heaters, no lights except the ones they brought with them. Just ice and bodies and silence. She reported it to Volkov, who sent Graves and Strand to investigate. The temperature reading at the chamber entrance stopped them both. That can't be right, Strand said, checking his wrist display. -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Yesterday it was -89. Graves's mouth was dry. The ice is melting. They descended together, moving slowly, their lights painting wild shadows on the walls. The change was immediately visible. The ice along the eastern wall, where the first bodies had been discovered, was receding. Not melting in the normal sense, but sublimating, turning directly from solid to vapor without passing through liquid phase. The air in the chamber was thick with it, a mist that caught their lights and scattered them into rainbows. The bodies were emerging. Graves approached the nearest one, close enough to touch. The being's face was no longer obscured by ice. You could see the texture of the skin now, grey and smooth, almost stone-like. The eyes, still closed, were sunken beneath prominent brows. The mouth was slightly open, and inside he could see what passed for teeth. Too many of them. Too sharp. "We need to document everything," he said, pulling out his camera. "If this keeps accelerating, they'll be completely exposed within days." Strand wasn't listening. He was staring at the wall behind the melting ice, his light fixed on something newly revealed. "Elliot, look at this." Carved symbols covered the exposed wall, different from the ones they'd found before. These weren't linguistic. They were pictographic. Images arranged in sequence, telling a story. The first image, a sphere, presumably a planet, orbiting a star. The second, the star growing larger, brighter, wrong somehow. The third, ships leaving the planet, dozens of them, fleeing into space. The fourth, a long journey, worlds past and abandoned. The fifth, arrival at a new world, Mars. The sixth, building, establishing, living. The seventh, something else arriving. Something that didn't have a shape, that couldn't be properly carved because it wasn't a thing so much as an absence of things. The eighth, the chamber. The bodies arranged in circles. A door sealed. The ninth and final image, an empty chamber, just the spiral on the floor. And the door opened. Graves photographed each image, his hands shaking. When he was done, he turned to Strand, and his voice was barely a whisper. They weren't hiding here. Strand's face had gone pale. What were they doing? Graves looked back at the pictographs, at the final image of the empty chamber and the open door. They were hiding something. They returned to the surface and showed the images to the crew. The meeting that followed was tense, frightened, angry. Voices overlapped. Arguments erupted. Someone mentioned going home. Commander Volkov ended it with a single sentence delivered in her flat, matter-of-fact voice. "I've requested immediate extraction, but Earth says the next launch window isn't for 63 days. We're here until February at the earliest. So we deal with this now." She turned to Graves. "You have 72 hours to document everything. After that, we seal the chamber, permanently. We'll trigger a controlled collapse of the excavation site, bury it under 300 feet of regolith. Whatever's down there stays down there." Graves wanted to argue, wanted to say that they couldn't just bury the greatest discovery in human history, that they owed it to science, to humanity, to themselves to understand. But he looked at the faces around him and saw fear. Real fear. The kind that makes people do rash things. The kind that, if pushed too far, could fracture a crew already living on the knife's edge of survival. So he nodded. 72 hours. But he was already planning to use every single second. The next 2 days passed in a blur of frantic activity. Graves barely slept, surviving on coffee and adrenaline and something else, something he didn't want to name. He spent 18 hours a day in the chamber, photographing, measuring, recording. His journals from this period are almost manic, the handwriting deteriorating from precise and mechanical to wild and slanted. "The symbols are a warning," he wrote on December 14th. "They came here because they were being hunted, not by a species, by an idea, by an absence, they called it. The translation would be something like the unmaking. It doesn't kill, it erases. It removes you from existence piece by piece until there's nothing left, not even the memory of you. They thought Mars was far enough, dead enough, silent enough. They thought if they hid here, if they made themselves small and quiet, it would pass them by. They were wrong." On December 15th, the temperature in the chamber reached 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Impossible without an external heat source, but there it was. The ice was melting faster now. the bodies emerging from their frozen tombs like grotesque flowers blooming in reverse. Dr. Locke performed a close examination of the eastern wall bodies. She moved slowly, carefully, her breath fogging in the cold, despite the rising temperature. "The skin isn't grey from death," she reported over the comm. "It's naturally grey, almost like stone, but flexible. And look at the hands." Graves joined her, shining his light on the being's six-fingered hand. "The joints," Locke continued. "They're articulated differently than human fingers. More range of motion. These beings could manipulate objects we couldn't even hold." She paused. "And the eyes." She gently opened one of the being's eyelids with a gloved finger. The eye beneath was solid black. No white, no iris, no pupil. Just black, like looking into deep space. "If they had eyes like this," Strand said from behind them, "what kind of light did they see by? What kind of sun did they know?" Locke's hand was trembling as she closed the eyelid. "There's something else. The chest. Watch." They watched in silence for 10 seconds. Nothing. Then, barely perceptible, a movement. The chest rose, fell, rose again. "They're breathing," Locke whispered. "Dear God, they're breathing." Volkov's voice crackled through their comms. "Say that again." Locke's voice was shaking now. "Their chest is moving. Minimal, maybe one breath every 30 seconds, but it's moving. Commander, I don't think they're dead. I think they're dormant." Volkov's response was immediate. "Extraction team, return to surface, now." "That's an order." But Graves was already moving toward the chamber's center, towards the spiral carved into the floor, toward the depression that had haunted his dreams for days. "Elliot, no." Osman's voice urgent, frightened. "Whatever you're thinking, don't." Graves reached the spiral's center and knelt down. The depression was exactly the size of his hand, almost like it was waiting for him, like it had always been waiting. "They were running," he said quietly. "They ran so far, across light years, across centuries, and it followed them anyway." Volkov's voice was sharp. "What followed them?" Graves placed his hand in the depression. The world ended, not the real world. The world inside his head, every thought, every memory, every piece of himself that made him Elliot Graves was suddenly somewhere else. Someone else. He was standing in a corridor that dripped red. The walls were made of something that had once been alive but was now just meat, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Voices echoed from far away, speaking in the language from his dreams. And now he understood every word. "We seal the door." Another voice, desperate, afraid. "It won't stop it." A third voice, resigned. "It will slow it. Give the universe time." "Time for what?" The first voice again, and there were tears in it. "Time to forget we were ever here." The vision shifted. He saw the beings, alive and whole, arranging themselves in their circles. Saw them link hands. Saw them begin to sing, if you could call it singing. A sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the soul. They were singing themselves into stasis, into a sleep deeper than death, into a state where even the unmaking couldn't find them. Because the unmaking hunted consciousness. It fed on awareness. And if you could make yourself unconscious enough, absent enough, maybe it would pass you by. The chamber grew cold, impossibly cold. The kind of cold that doesn't just freeze water but stops motion itself. The beings froze mid-song, their voices trailing off into silence. The ice claimed them. The darkness claimed them. And they slept, dreaming shallow dreams of nothing at all. But the unmaking was patient. It had eaten galaxies. It could wait for a few thousand years. And then, on December 4th, 2041, 3 humans with lights and curiosity punched a hole in the chamber wall and let the warmth in, let the consciousness in, let the awareness seep down into the ice like blood into snow. And the unmaking remembered they were here. Graves screamed. He tried to pull his hand free, but it was stuck, held by something invisible, something that wasn't physical force but was, instead, the weight of inevitability. The chamber was glowing now, every surface ice, sublimating into mist, the bodies emerging fully, standing in their circles, not standing. They were still frozen, but standing anyway because as the distinction between possible and impossible no longer applied. Behind Graves, Osman and Strand were screaming his name. Volkov was demanding status updates. Locke was already running toward the exit shaft, but Graves couldn't move. He was seeing too much, understanding too much. The beings weren't just sleeping. They were serving as a lock. Their dormant consciousness was a seal on something deeper, something that lived beneath the chamber, beneath the crust, beneath the planet itself. Mars wasn't just a refuge, it was a prison, and humanity had just opened the cell door. His hand finally came free, and he collapsed backward, blood streaming from his nose, his eyes, his ears. Strand and Osman grabbed him under the arms and dragged him towards the exit, their boots slipping on ice that was now water, water that was rising, filling the chamber like the planet itself was weeping. Behind them, the 89 bodies stood in their perfect circles, facing outward as if waiting for something, and from beneath the chamber floor came a sound. Low, rhythmic, patient, a heartbeat. Not from the bodies, from below, from beneath, from the thing that had followed them across the universe and waited in the Martian soil for someone to break the seal. They hauled Graves up the shaft. Strand was crying. Osman was praying in a language Graves didn't recognize, and Graves, barely conscious, kept repeating the same words over and over. Seal it, bury it, don't let it reach the surface. Dr. Locke met them at the top with a medical kit and a sedative. Graves fought the injection, but his body betrayed him, and he sank into darkness, still whispering warnings about heartbeats and prisons and the thing that unmakes. December 17th, 6 o'clock in the morning. Graves woke in medical bay, his wrists secured to the bed with Velcro straps. His head felt like someone had taken an ice pick to it. His mouth tasted of copper and regret. Locke was sitting beside him, reading his vitals off a monitor. When she saw his eyes open, she leaned forward. "How much do you remember?" Graves's voice was raw. "All of it. How long was I out?" Locke's expression was grim. 36 hours. You had a seizure, your brain activity. I've never seen anything like it. Every neuron firing at once. By all rights, you should be brain dead. But here you are. Graves tried to sit up, but the straps held. "Let me go." Locke shook her head. "Not until Commander Volkov clears you. She's already ordered the demolition. It's happening today." Graves closed his eyes. Good. That was good. The chamber needed to be buried. The seal needed to be restored. Maybe if they moved fast enough, if they covered it deep enough, the thing below would go back to sleep. Maybe. The controlled demolition began at noon. Castellanos and her engineering team had rigged the excavation site with charges positioned to bring down the ceiling and fill the void with 40 tons of Martian regolith. It wouldn't be permanent, nothing ever was, but it would buy time. The crew gathered in the operations center to watch the seismic monitors. Volkov stood at the front, her hand hovering over the detonation trigger. "Any objections?" she asked. Silence filled the room like a held breath. Then, "God forgive us for what we're burying." She pressed the trigger. The station shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The monitors showed the shockwave propagating through the ground, the excavation collapsing in on itself. 300 feet of rock and ice crashing down into the chamber. For a moment, the seismic activity spiked off the charts. Then it settled. Then silence. Volkov's voice was quiet but firm. "It's done. Pack everything. We're abandoning RE Station. Extraction ship Meridian launches December 28th. Until then, we survive." But survival on Mars is never guaranteed. They spent the next 8 days in a kind of numb anticipation, going through the motions of packing up 6 months of life, saying goodbye to a home that had tried to kill them in ways both mundane and cosmic. The storms were getting worse. Dust devils 2 miles high danced across the canyon floor. The temperature continued to drop, and Hugh Deering, environmental systems operator, was having trouble sleeping. His final log entry, dated December 26th, was found on his personal tablet. "I can still hear it. The pulse, it's not stopping. It's getting faster. Elliot said we buried it, but I don't think you can bury something that was never really there to begin with. I don't think you can seal away an absence. I think we just made it angry. The others don't hear it. Or maybe they do, and they're pretending they don't. But I hear it every night, every morning, every time I close my eyes. That steady, patient heartbeat coming from beneath my feet. It's not hunting us. Not yet. It's savoring the knowledge that it's finally, after thousands of years, awake. I'm going outside for a walk. I need to clear my head. I'll be back before curfew." He never came back. They found his environment suit 3 miles from the station, arranged neatly on a rock formation, completely empty. No body, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just the suit, as if Hugh Deering had simply stepped out of it and walked away into the frozen Martian night. The official report would later say he became disoriented in a dust storm, that he removed his suit during a hypoxic episode, a common occurrence in extreme environments, that his body was never recovered due to the severity of the weather. But Graves knew better. Graves had seen what was under the ice, had felt its attention turn toward them, and he knew that Hugh hadn't died. He'd been unmade, erased, removed from existence piece by piece until not even his body remained. The first victim, but not the last. January 14th, 2042. The Meridian reached Earth orbit after a 43-day journey through the dark. Of the 12 crew members who'd launched from RE Station, 11 disembarked. Commander Petra Volkov was first down the gangway, her face carved from granite. Then Locke, then Strand, then Osman, his eyes red from crying. Graves was last. He walked slowly, like a man who'd forgotten how gravity worked, and when he stepped onto Earth soil for the first time in 9 months, he felt nothing. No relief, no joy. Just the certainty that he'd left something terrible behind, and that terrible thing was waking up. The debriefing took 3 weeks. They were separated, interviewed individually, their stories cross-referenced and analysed. The inconsistencies were noted. The consistencies were more troubling. The official NASA report, published in February 2042, was 18 pages of careful language and bureaucratic hedging. The summary, catastrophic geological instability, led to mission abort. 1 casualty due to adverse weather conditions during emergency evacuation. All recovered samples inconclusive. Further missions to the Valles Marineris region postponed pending additional safety assessment. But the classified report, the one that required Level 5 clearance to access, told a different story. Dr. Patricia Okoye, who served as NASA administrator from 2039 to 2044, agreed to speak with us on condition of anonymity. She's 71 now, living in a suburb of Baltimore, and when she talks about Mars, her hands shake. The samples Osman brought back showed DNA that was 78% compatible with human, not evolved separately, related, distantly, but related. The implications, do you understand what that means? Either we share a common ancestor, which is impossible, or someone seeded multiple worlds with the same genetic template. And if it's the latter, that means someone was out there, traveling between stars, millions of years ago. Someone who looked almost like us. She pauses, pouring herself tea with hands that won't stay steady. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was what the geneticists found in the cellular structure. Sections that didn't code for anything. Dead sequences. Junk. Except it wasn't junk. It was a message, encoded in the building blocks of their cells. And when we finally translated it, it was the same phrase, repeated 1,000 times. We tried to run, we tried to hide, we tried to forget. Nothing worked. It remembers everything. The crew dispersed after debriefing. Volkov returned to Russia and took a job training cosmonauts, never speaking publicly about Mars. Strand went back to navigation work, accepting a position on the International Space Station, as far from Mars as he could get while still being in space. Locke joined Doctors Without Borders and spent 2 years in Sudan, healing people under the same sun that shone on Mars. Osman tried to go back to his old life, his old research, but the dreams never stopped. He took sleeping pills, saw therapists, tried meditation, medication, and finally just gave up on sleep altogether. On October 3rd, 2042, his sister found him in his apartment in Manchester, dead from an overdose of sleeping pills he'd stockpiled over months. The note beside him said only, "I'm sorry, I couldn't stop hearing the heartbeat." And Graves went home. He bought a small cottage in the Fiordland region of New Zealand, about as far from civilization as you could get without leaving the planet entirely. Mountains and mist and endless green. No red soil, no thin air, no chambers hiding secrets that should have stayed hidden. For 2 years, he lived like a hermit. He grew vegetables, chopped wood, walked along the fjords and tried not to think about Mars. Tried not to remember the feeling of his hand in that depression, the weight of alien consciousness pressing against his own, the knowledge that something vast and patient had noticed humanity, and noticed was not the same as forgotten. The documentary crew found him in December 2043. It took 3 months of negotiation, countless unanswered emails, and finally showing up at his door with a bottle of whiskey and a promise that they just wanted to understand. He agreed to one interview. Just one. And only because he thought someone should know the truth before it was too late. We filmed at his cottage, Graves sitting on his porch with mountains rising behind him. He looked older than 43. His hair had gone grey at the temples. His hands had a slight tremor he tried to hide by keeping them in his pockets. The interview lasted 4 hours, but the part that matters, the part that still keeps me awake at night, came at the end. "What do you think those beings were running from?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the mist rolling through the valleys. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "I saw it. When I touched that chamber, when I connected with whatever they left behind, I saw what they saw in their final moments." I leaned forward. "What was it?" His eyes were distant, seeing something I couldn't. Nothing. Literally nothing. Not darkness. Not emptiness. Absence. A space where existence used to be. It doesn't kill. It erases. It reaches into reality and pulls things out, like pulling a thread from a tapestry. And once you're gone, it's not just that you're dead. It's that you never were. The universe rewrites itself around the hole you left, and nobody remembers you were ever there. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were haunted in a way that made my skin crawl. They fled across the galaxy, ran for centuries, maybe millennia, tried to hide on Mars because it was dead, because dead things don't attract attention. They put themselves into that frozen sleep, thinking if they were quiet enough, still enough, it would pass them by. And it did. For 50,000 years, it passed them by. I had to ask, until we found them. Graves nodded slowly, until we woke them up, until we brought consciousness and curiosity and light into that dark place. We rang the dinner bell. We told the universe, look, here's life, here's awareness, here's something to unmake. My next question felt foolish, even as I asked it. You think it's coming here, to Earth? Graves stood up, walked to the edge of the porch. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of rain. I think it already knows we're here. I think the moment we opened that chamber, we painted a target on our entire species. And the thing about the unmaking is that it's patient. It doesn't rush. It savors. It's probably already started pulling at the edges of reality, testing the boundaries, seeing where we're weakest. I tried to find some hope in his words and found none. That sounds like the end of the world. He smiled, but there was no humor in it, no warmth, just a terrible resignation. No. The end of the world would be merciful. What's coming is worse. It's the end of ever having been a world at all. I didn't know what to say to that. What do you say when someone tells you that existence itself is under threat? So I asked the only question I could think of. Is there anything we can do to stop it? Graves shook his head slowly, like a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. Those beings were more advanced than us. They had technology we can't even imagine. They could travel between stars. They could manipulate the building blocks of life itself. And they couldn't stop it. They could only run. And eventually they couldn't even do that. The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. So we're doomed. He looked up at the sky, where stars were beginning to emerge through the clouds, distant and cold and indifferent. I don't know. Maybe. Probably. But we're human. We're stubborn. We're creative. We're really, really good at surviving things that should kill us. So maybe we'll find a way. Maybe we'll figure out what they couldn't. Or maybe... He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. We both knew what he was thinking. Or maybe we'll end up like them. Frozen. Silent. Erased. The interview ended shortly after that. Graves went inside, and I packed up the equipment with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. As we were leaving, he came back out with something in his hand. A journal. His journal from Mars. The pages were worn, the edges stained with coffee and God knows what else. Take this, he said, pressing it into my hands with an urgency that bordered on desperation. If something happens to me, if I disappear, like Hugh did, people should know what we found. People should know what's coming. I tried to reassure him, tried to inject some normalcy into a conversation that had gone so far beyond normal, it had left the concept behind entirely. Nothing's going to happen to you. He smiled sadly, and in that smile was the knowledge of something I couldn't see, something he'd carried back from Mars like a disease. I still hear it, every night, that pulse, that heartbeat, and it's getting closer. His words hung in the air between us like a ghost, and I had nothing to say that would make them less true. 2 months after that interview, on January 3rd, 2044, Elliot Graves was found dead in his cottage. Local police determined it was natural causes, possibly a heart attack, the kind of thing that happens to middle-aged men who've lived under extraordinary stress. But the autopsy revealed something that the coroner couldn't explain and didn't want to think about too hard. His heart was normal. His brain was normal. All his organs were normal, functioning, healthy. By every measurable standard, every test they could run, every metric they had for determining the difference between life and death, there was no reason for him to be dead. He was just dead anyway, as if existence had simply decided he didn't belong anymore. as if the universe had reached in and pulled out the thread that was Elliot Graves, and everything had quietly, efficiently rewritten itself around the absence. His final journal entry, written the night before he died, contained only one sentence in handwriting that had deteriorated to barely legible scrawl. It remembers us now. In October 2043, NASA announced the Ares Station 2 initiative with great fanfare and optimism. 24 crew members, state-of-the-art equipment, advanced safety protocols. Landing site, Valles Marineris, Northern Rim. The exact same location as the original station because that's where the infrastructure already existed, where the preliminary work had been done, where it made the most sense from a logistical and financial standpoint. The launch is scheduled for March 2045. When pressed about the fate of the first mission during the press conference, the NASA administrator gave the official statement with practiced ease. Geological instability, equipment failure, an unfortunate loss of life, but nothing that can't be mitigated with better technology and improved protocols. Lessons learned. Progress forward. The future of humanity among the stars. They haven't mentioned the chamber, haven't mentioned the bodies, haven't mentioned the spiral carved into the floor, or the depression that fit a human hand so perfectly. Haven't mentioned that the last orbital imagery of the region, taken in September 2044, shows thermal blooms spreading from the original excavation site like a cancer, like something waking up, like something breathing. The burial didn't hold. The seal was broken, and something that was patient for 50,000 years has finally begun to wake. I think about graves sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is still and dark and it's easy to believe in things that shouldn't exist. I think about his warning, about the patient heartbeat growing closer with each passing day. I think about Hugh Deering, who walked into the Martian night and was simply erased from existence, leaving nothing behind but an empty suit and questions no one wants to answer. I think about Osman, who couldn't stop hearing the pulse even in death, who took his own life just to make the sound stop. I think about the beings in the ice, who ran across the galaxy and thought they found a place to hide, only to discover that there is no hiding from something that can unmake the very concept of existence. And late at night, when the world is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, and the journal Graves gave me sits on my desk like an accusation, I listen. I listen for a heartbeat that shouldn't be there, for a pulse that doesn't belong to me, or to anything living, for the sound of something vast and patient and hungry, moving through the spaces between reality. And sometimes, God help me, I hear it, slow, steady, patient, getting closer, always getting closer. And I wonder how long we have before it arrives, before it reaches into our world and begins pulling threads, unmaking us piece by piece until there's nothing left but an empty planet and the faint echo of a species that once looked up at the stars and thought they were alone. We're not alone. We never were. And that might be the most terrifying discovery of all. The journal sits on my desk now, and sometimes I open it and read Graves's increasingly frantic handwriting, his desperate attempts to understand and warn and save. The last entry before he died is the shortest, just 5 words that loop through my mind in the darkness. It remembers us now, and beneath that, in handwriting so small, I almost missed it. One final line, and it's hungry. I've tried to warn people, tried to tell them what Graves told me, what the crew of Ares Station discovered in that frozen chamber beneath the red soil. But who listens to stories about cosmic horrors and ancient warnings and things that unmake existence itself? Who takes seriously the ravings of a documentarian who spent too much time talking to traumatized astronauts and reading the journal of a dead man? No one. That's who. So Ares Station 2 will launch as planned. 24 men and women will descend to Mars with hope in their hearts and science in their minds, and they'll land at Valles Marineris, and they'll walk over the spot where the chamber lies buried, and they'll feel nothing at first. But then, maybe one of them will have dreams of red corridors, and voices in an unknown language. Maybe someone will wake in the middle of the night with the certainty that something vast and patient is listening to their thoughts. Maybe the seismic monitors will pick up a rhythmic pulse coming from deep beneath the surface, a heartbeat that grows stronger with each passing day. And maybe, just maybe, they'll understand what Graves understood in those final moments with his hand pressed into that smooth depression, what the beings in the ice learned too late as the unmaking swept across their world and erased them from the universe. That some doors should never be opened, some seals should never be broken, some things should remain buried, not because we're afraid of what we'll find, but because of what will find us. The Meridian launched from Mars on December 28th, 2041, carrying 11 survivors and one empty seat where Hugh Deering should have been. They didn't know it then, but they'd already been marked, tagged, noticed by something that had been sleeping for 50 millennia and was now finally awake. The mission was declared a qualified success by people who didn't know what success actually meant, who didn't understand that opening that chamber had fundamentally changed humanity's relationship with the cosmos. We weren't explorers anymore. We were prey. Graves knew this. He tried to warn us. And we, in our infinite wisdom and stupidity and stubborn refusal to believe in monsters, ignored him. We always do. We ignore the warnings and open the doors and wake the sleeping things, and then we act surprised when the monsters turn out to be real. But this time, the monster isn't something we can fight or trap or understand. This time, the monster is absence itself. Negation. The opposite of existence, wearing existence as a mask. And it's coming. It's been coming since December 4th, 2041, when 3 humans with flashlights and curiosity broke a seal that had held for longer than human civilization has existed. It's been coming, and it's patient, and it's hungry, and it remembers everything. I finish writing this, and I sit in my office, and I listen to the silence. The clock on the wall ticks. The heater hums. Outside, cars pass on the wet street, their tires hissing against pavement. Normal sounds. Human sounds. The sounds of a world that doesn't know what's coming. But underneath all that, if you listen carefully enough, if you really pay attention, there's something else. A pulse. Faint. Steady. Patient. The heartbeat of something that shouldn't have a heart, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I heard it start about 3 months ago, right around the time I finished interviewing Graves. At first, I thought it was tinnitus or stress or too much coffee and not enough sleep, but it's none of those things. It's real as the journal on my desk, as real as the classified files I've read, as real as the orbital photographs showing thermal bloom spreading across the Martian surface like a living thing. The unmaking is awake, and it knows we're here. Graves was right about everything. The beings in the ice were running from something that can't be outrun. They tried to hide on Mars, and it found them anyway. They put themselves into that frozen sleep, hoping to outlast it, hoping it would forget and move on to easier prey. And maybe it would have, if we hadn't come along and broken the seal. But we did. We always do. That's what humans do. We find the locked doors and we pick the locks and we throw them open wide, and we never stop to think about why they were locked in the first place. The launch date for Ares Station 2 is March 15th, 2045. 4 months from now. 24 people who don't know they're walking into a trap, who think they're making history, who believe in science and progress and humanity's manifest destiny among the stars. I've tried to stop it. I've sent the journal to NASA, to the press, to anyone who might listen, but journals from dead astronauts aren't evidence. Thermal anomalies on Mars can be explained by volcanic activity or instrument error, and stories about cosmic horrors that erase existence itself are the stuff of fiction, not fact. So the launch will happen, the astronauts will go, and something that has been waiting for 50,000 years will finally have what it wants. Not victims, not prey, not food in any conventional sense. What the unmaking wants is simpler and more terrible than that. It wants to unmake, to erase, to reach into reality and pull out threads until the whole tapestry unravels. It doesn't hate us. Hate would imply emotion, and the unmaking is beyond emotion. It simply does what it does. The way a black hole devours light, the way entropy increases, the way all things fall toward their ending. We're just next in line. I close Graves's journal and I put it in my desk drawer, and I sit in the darkness and listen to that patient heartbeat growing louder, growing closer, and I think about the beings in the ice who ran so far and hid so well and were found anyway. I think about Hugh Deering, erased from existence so completely that not even his body remained. I think about Osman, driven to suicide by dreams of red corridors and voices that wouldn't stop. I think about Graves, who died of nothing at all, who simply stopped existing one night in a cottage in New Zealand while the rest of the world slept. And I wonder when it will be my turn, when the unmaking will reach into my reality and pull me out like a loose thread, rewriting the universe around my absence until no one remembers I was ever here. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, maybe not for decades. The unmaking is patient. It has all the time in the world, all the time in every world, all the time that ever was or will be, because time itself is just another thread in the tapestry, and threads can be pulled, everything can be unmade, everything will be eventually. That's what Graves understood in his final moments. That's what drove Osman mad and killed Deering, and is now, slowly, inevitably, coming for the rest of us. We opened the door. We broke the seal. We woke the sleeping horror. And now it's coming home. The story ends here, in this office, with this journal, with the sound of a heartbeat that isn't mine, growing louder in the darkness. But the story isn't over. It won't be over until there's no one left to tell it, until the unmaking has finished its work, and the universe has forgotten that humanity ever existed, that Earth ever spun in the void, that Mars ever held its terrible secret. We tried to reach the stars. We tried to answer the oldest question, are we alone? And we got our answer, no. We're not alone. We never were. And God help us, we should have been.